Item of business, which is a debate on motion 23383 in the name of Mark Ruskell on declaration of a nature emergency. I would invite all members who wish to contribute to this debate to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on Mark Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I move this motion today to declare a nature emergency in Scotland and to commit to an emergency response, reversing the decline and restoring nature to its former abundance and glory. And I'd like to thank over 8,000 people who in the last 3 days alone have taken action to add their voices to declare a nature emergency in Scotland. We live in days of great crisis and uncertainty. The health, climate and nature emergencies have formed a perfect storm. But in addressing these crises together, there are opportunities to grow a green recovery that supports new livelihoods while building up our resilience in the face of devastating climate change. We are in a global nature emergency, but we can't ignore the fact that this emergency is real in Scotland too. 1 in 9 of our species are in danger of extinction. And last year's State of Nature report showed that we've lost the vast majority of our wildflower meadows and species like the great yellow bumblebee with them. Half of our skylarks gone, and many of our wetlands and other precious habitats too. The abundance of species in Scotland has collapsed by nearly a quarter in the last 25 years. And there's been no slowing in this catastrophic rate of decline in the last decade. 265 plants, 153 fungi and lichens, 92 vertebrates and 132 invertebrates, all at the risk of extinction from the threats of intensive farming, industrial development, invasive species and climate change. This is a crisis that demands the same level of attention and action as the climate emergency. And the first step is to declare it for what it truly is, a nature emergency. The second step on the journey to recovery must be legislation. Just as our legally binding climate targets have brought focus and scrutiny, so nature recovery targets are needed in law to commit to halting the decline within a decade and then fully restoring nature soon after. The Scottish Government must put targets for nature recovery on a statutory footing with clear milestones, giving certainty to everyone that they will be delivered and that the funding and planning will follow. And parts of this recovery must involve designating new protected sites. And we've already seen that both the UK and EU commit to a target of 30% of our land and sea to be protected by 2030. But because of weak legislation and no targets, we've seen minimal progress here in Scotland. Take the designation of marine protected areas, for example. The 2016 programme for government committed to 18 new protected areas for seabirds by 2017. But so far, not a single one has been delivered, and discussions are still ongoing. Time is simply running out for many birds like the Arctic tern. These protected sites must be delivered, but simply drawing a line on a map isn't enough. They can't be paper parks. They must come with meaningful protections, monitoring and investment. Designating marine protected areas without fisheries management measures and proper licensing of other activities is weak. 1 in 5 of our protected features in Scotland are in unfavourable condition. They're not recovering, the nature emergency is worsening, and action is needed. Alongside these designated sites, we need corridors of habitats for species to flow. The importance of an ecological network spanning across landscapes in the whole country is critical. 2 years ago, this Parliament supported my motion to back the formation of a national ecological network. But 2 years on, I see no urgency from government to set this up. But this national infrastructure is the very nature of Scotland itself, and it must be at the centrepiece of the next national planning framework. The opportunity here is the partnership between the recovery of nature and the recovery of the economy, a Green New Deal to improve the health of our environment, which already provides over £20 billion in ecosystem services to our economy every year, from crop pollination to recreation. And the sectors that are holding back progress in restoring nature need challenge by strong agencies with the force of the law behind them. Government must lead the change rather than papering over false consensus. Take the salmon farming sector, which continues to plan rapid expansion in MPAs, threatening merle and flameshell beds with pollution. This directly contravenes the recommendations of this Parliament's salmon farming inquiry. But at the same time, Presiding Officer, there are wonderful crofters, farmers, foresters, estate owners, charities and communities who are driving their vision of habitat restoration, rewilding, agroecology and species reintroduction forward in practical and exciting ways. There are kelp harvesters, creelers, scallop divers and ecotourism operators who are working with their communities to show us what is hidden beneath the waves and protect it. There are young people desperate to join them and tackle this nature emergency. So today, we should declare it for them and for the shared future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. And opening for the Government, Rosanna Cunningham, Cabinet Secretary, who joins us remotely.
Presiding Officer, internationally, a new global biodiversity framework is being developed, and Scotland is adopting a leadership role in contributing to that process. The new framework will be agreed in China in 2021. Leading the Edinburgh process, we have mobilised a global network, subnational governments, cities and local authorities, and are feeding their views into the process, developing the new global framework. Scotland was the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency in May last year, and my then statement to Parliament highlighted the global crisis for biodiversity right alongside the global climate emergency. The Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services had published the most comprehensive global assessment on biodiversity for many years, bringing the ongoing decline in biodiversity into sharp focus. In response, the First Minister stated in Parliament that biodiversity is as important as the challenge on climate change, and that we would ensure that our actions produce the transformative change that is needed to address biodiversity loss. The Environment Strategy published in February also explicitly recognises the twin global climate and nature crises. Scotland's natural environment is our greatest national asset. It provides the foundations our society and economy depend upon and improves our physical and mental health. It is also crucial to Scotland's businesses, brand and reputation. Now, while most governments do continue, obviously, to prioritise their response to COVID-19, clearly the other global emergency, the climate change, has not gone away. Climate change and biodiversity loss are twin crises and must be tackled as such. I restate this in one forum or another practically every single day. Building a green recovery is at the heart of our response to the pandemic. The PFG announced a new national mission to help create new green jobs and dedicate £100 million over the next 5 years to a Green Jobs Fund. This includes boosting youth employment opportunities and targeting future skills and capacity requirements in nature and land-based jobs. And we'll do that by expanding existing apprenticeship and undergraduate schemes in public agencies, including Scottish Forestry and Forestry and Land Scotland, which will double their existing commitments. We're also developing a green workforce and skills development package with an initial skills gap analysis undertaken by Nature Scot. Projects which address biodiversity loss are a key element in our climate change adaptation plans. Nature helps regulate our climate, and the changing climate is a major factor affecting the state of nature. Both require us to address the impact of our choices on the health of our natural environment. Supporting biodiversity and nature-based solutions are essential parts of the action this government is already taking to put us on track to a just transition to net zero by 2045. And the forthcoming climate change plan update will say more on this. We have significantly increased funding for peatland restoration, committing £250 million over 10 years to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030. This will help the sector develop with an aim to create around 200 new jobs over 3 to 5 years, mostly in rural and remote areas. And multi-year funding means contractors have greater confidence to invest in skills and machinery, and landowners are already coming forward to discuss potential large-scale projects. Scotland's forests and woodlands also have an important role to play in our green recovery and in delivering our commitment to net zero by 2045. Woodland creation, including native trees, is a key component of this. We aim to increase woodland cover to 21% of the total area by 2032, and targets for woodland creation are increasing to 18,000 hectares a year by 2024-25. This will deliver social and environmental benefits, including helping develop new networks for nature. As members will be aware, our recent programme for government announced that we would publish a high-level statement of intent on biodiversity before the end of the year. And this is against the backdrop of the ongoing delays to the negotiations on a new global biodiversity framework, provisionally to resume next year and to conclude in May. We are already doing a great deal, but we acknowledge that more is required. We are continuing to support existing projects and to seek out biodiversity improvements pending the revision of our Scottish biodiversity strategy to reflect the new global biodiversity framework. Presiding Officer, my colleague Marie Goujon will reference the remaining parts of the somewhat overburdened Green motion at the close of this very short debate. And I have to say, a cynical person might assume it is designed to fail.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And I call on Liz Smith to open and move the amendment in the name of the Conservatives.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to the Greens for bringing this debate to Parliament. Firstly, because it's all too easy in these pandemic days to ignore the other huge issues of our time. But secondly, because of the imminence of COP26, at which Scotland has the opportunity to demonstrate that she is a world leader shaping both climate change and biodiversity. And of course, it will also be a key moment for the scrutiny of the Scottish Government's environment record, more of which later from my colleague Maurice Golden. And we can agree too with the first part of the Greens motion because it highlights the key issues in biodiversity. But it will not be a surprise to the Parliament we cannot agree with the second section, specifically about the demand to end driven grouse shooting and controlled muir burn, which is why I've amended the motion accordingly. Now, it goes without saying that Scotland starts from a good place. I think the Cabinet Secretary said that in her opening speech, given just how rich our biodiversity and natural landscapes are. And there's absolutely no question, I don't think, about the unanimity about parliamentarians' duty to maintain and restore them to the highest environmental standards. We need to understand these landscapes and safeguard and enhance them. And we know too, perhaps even more so because of COVID, just how important our wildlands, nature parks and green spaces have become, as well as our farms, our aquaculture and plantations, most especially because of the vast array of ecosystems which have such positive benefits for our well-being. What is most encouraging are the changing attitudes for large swathes of public opinion, much more understanding and appreciation of the role that nature has to play. But set against this are all the very worrying warning signals, many of which Mark Ruskell spoke about in his opening speech. For me, one of the most frightening was the report from the UN last year, which revealed that 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction. And in the UK, 56% of our species have declined in the last 50 years. That situation could hardly be more serious. Now, in the very short time I have, I can't deal with every theme that I would really like to mention in this debate, but there are some important ones. Firstly, I think the focus has to be on scientific facts. In Scotland, not only do we have a wealth of natural landscapes, but we also have a wealth of ecological and scientific expertise. And I think it's vitally important that policy is underpinned by the facts rather than by the hyperbole and raw emotion that sometimes dominates environmental debates. For example, the recent abuse that has been directed at landowners and gamekeepers as they seek to improve biodiversity is both completely unacceptable and unwarranted, especially because the facts show that so many of them have, especially in recent years, done so much to protect and enhance the land on which they work. Only 2 weeks ago, Scottish Government commissioned research led by Scotland's Rural College and the James Hutton Institute concluded that driven grouse shooting hugely benefits Scotland's rural economy, most especially in terms of sustaining jobs. And on this theme, there is very encouraging evidence that several species have actually increased as a result of carefully controlled muir burn. Golden plovers, merlins, curlews, to name some. And we know too that about the very encouraging results to enhance ecosystems from the Langham study. Secondly, the NFUS, Scottish Land and Estates, the GWCT, BASC all make very important points about a holistic approach to biodiversity. For example, agriculture has been doing incredibly well recently on reducing emissions and harnessing renewable electricity. But they want to see a joint approach, most especially when it comes to regional land use and the clusters, which have obviously been trialled in England and working very well. Those farmers who want to be involved in peatland restoration or tree planting or developing wildlife habitats because they know that is absolutely the right thing to do, they need support and they need the financial incentives to ensure that we have rural jobs and investment. And they need help too by the way of the grants to help prevent the invasive species such as rhododendron, hogweed and all the beavers that are causing such extensive riparian damage. Presiding Officer, my colleague Finlay Carson will deal with some of the aspects of our water, which is so important to beaches and lochs and rivers, etc., and we should not forget about that. But can I just finish on one point? That there is another concern about that, and that is nonetheless about the growing minority of people who, through their own selfishness and irresponsibility, choose to make that life very much harder for our land managers by deliberately disregarding the countryside and national park codes, dumping rubbish, destroying trees, despoiling our beaches and lochs, and so many other ways of encroaching upon the ability to increase our biodiversity. So there is something about not necessarily just about improving our biodiversity, but ensuring that everybody understands that and that far fewer people are in a position to scar our nature. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. And I call on Claudia Beamish to speak to and move Amendment 23383.3. Just to remind all members they have 4 minutes in the contributions this afternoon. Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And thank you to Mark Ruskell for raising this important issue for debate across this chamber. Biodiversity is far more important to our country than many people may realise. It underpins a healthy environment, is the foundation for many jobs and a key part of Scottish tourism, and is an inspiration and a joy for us all, and of Scotland's great cultural figures, past and present. There is much that Scottish Labour stand for in Mark Ruskell's in his motion. Scottish Labour, like the Greens, have long stated that we face a nature emergency, one that is the climate emergency. However, we cannot support the Green motion today unless amended by our Scottish Labour amendment, which I move in my name. This recognises the need for rapid change, while also respecting the challenges faced by rural and coastal communities in an urgently needed just transition, bringing support for that change to our communities. The Tory amendment shows, frankly, that they do not recognise the urgent need for change, and we cannot support that position. It is a serious cause for concern that the Scottish Government is not prepared to recognise, as I understand it, the need for the declaration of a nature emergency, which is inextricably fused with the already declared climate emergency. Thus, we cannot support their amendment today. Regretfully, under the SNP, it looks as if we have now missed, along with other countries I acknowledge, many targets for biodiversity, some of them legally binding. And this should come as no surprise, though, when we see in real terms funding for environmental bodies has been slashed by 40% since 2010, according to Scottish Environment Link. There simply must be a turnaround for the 2020s, and a robust, well-funded biodiversity route map and action plan is the Scottish Government's responsibility. Scottish Labour want to see targets for nature recovery set into legislation, and I look forward to arguing for my amendments to take effect in the Continuity Bill. Most urgently, focus must be turned to a green recovery for those who work with and for nature in rural and remote parts of Scotland. We have seen some of these sectors face precarious futures already. There also needs to be planning for the future so that we have skills for these long-term projects, such as planting native woodlands, and to precious peatlands, so in need of our protection and restoration. And in several weeks' time, I highlight to the whole chamber conservationists' hope that the heart of the Flow Country, an area of 1,400 square kilometres of almost pristine peatland, will have made a significant step closer to becoming the first peatland globally to win World Heritage Site status. And I let us all be sure to highlight this to the UK government as this comes forward. We need to enhance, connect and expand all habitat, looking to build a nature network. And RSPB Scotland state that this would create 300 direct jobs. NFUS highlight the good work farmers can do as custodians of our environment and the need for advice and support to build a sustainable future for them. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us in closing what action is being taken in response to the Just Transition Commission's recommendation for a green recovery to promote investments and protect and grow rural economy and employment? This, of course, applies to coastal communities and marine environments as well, who just as urgently need a blue recovery, investing in marine nature and its recovery, and taking on illegal and inappropriate fishing activity, now will develop and help widespread benefits and create more resilient economies. I ask the Cabinet Secretary to protect the iconic Flapper Skate, so close to extinction. Often overlooked, it is very disappointing to see that the recovery of our seas has been completely absent from the Scottish Government's Economic Recovery Implementation Plan. And there should also be more locally led action involving communities, local authorities, landowners, farmers, and more. More equitable land ownership will improve management of land in the public interest and in the face of our dual emergencies. And many local authorities across the UK are working with plant life to plant wildflowers on verges and do much more. There's been a 20% drop in floral diversity along our road verges since 1990. And this simple act can save money, save bees, and brighten our communities. I welcome this debate. Our environment deserves strategy and funding from empowered local authorities and communities and a bold government. Let us not forget that we as human beings are part of these ecosystems as well. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And in the last for opening contributions, can I call Liam MacArthur? I would just remind all members, 4-minute contributions today, please. 4-minute contributions. Mr MacArthur, who joins us remotely.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Our planet is on the brink of irreparable damage. Parliament recognised this in declaring a climate emergency. Scottish Liberal Democrats agree it's time to do likewise in response to the existential threat facing so many species, so much of our biodiversity, and declare a nature emergency. So I thank Mark Ruskell for enabling the debate to take place. And while our amendment wasn't selected, I'm pleased the amendment in Claudia Beamish's name captures much of what we had proposed and therefore confirm we will be supporting it at decision time. In a pre-pandemic age, members will recall that we entered 2020 with the spectre of apocalyptic wildfires in Australia declared amongst quote, the worst wildlife disasters in modern history. Since then, large parts of the US have similarly been ablaze. Extreme weather and the fires, floods and droughts that follow are becoming more common and take a heavy toll on nature. Meanwhile, an estimated 1 million animal and plant species are now at risk of extinction because of human activities. As Link and others point out, 49% of species in Scotland have declined and 1 in 9 are threatened with national extinction. Climate crisis and biodiversity loss are not separate issues. As others have observed, they're deeply intertwined in sickness and in health. There's no doubt that human actions lie at the heart of degradation of the natural world that we've seen, but human actions can help repair, restore and revitalise too. And the good news is the natural world is on our side. For all the technologies we will invest in, a biodiverse ecosystem offers us the surest means of storing carbon and reducing emissions. That's why, as the motion makes clear, nature, jobs and skills must be at the heart of the government's green recovery plans. Scotland's peatlands, for example, should be one of our greatest assets. They deserve protection with a phasing out of large-scale extraction and long-term support for restoration efforts that have already proved their value. It's time too for legislation to introduce licensing of grouse moor management, ensuring all practices are sustainable and compatible with declarations of a climate and nature emergency. Legislation is also needed to halt the loss of biodiversity and to allow the creation of more coherent nature networks. But as our amendment highlighted, addressing the nature emergency will not simply happen in our rural areas. This is a challenge for all parts of Scotland, as it is around the world. It's why the Scottish Government's Continuity Bill must be amended next week to provide greater confidence that funding, high environmental standards and a robust independent oversight will continue after the UK leaves the EU. And Presiding Officer, like the climate, nature doesn't care about the Constitution. It can't afford to wait as we embark on more drawn-out and divisive navel-gazing over independence. The nature and climate emergencies require us to use the considerable powers, resources and ingenuity we already have to deliver the change we need to see. Scottish Liberal Democrats are committed to playing our part in helping deliver that change. Thank you.
Mr MacArthur, thank you very much for your timekeeping as well. We move to the open part of the debate and I call Alison Johnson to be followed by Annabel Ewing. Alison Johnson.
Presiding Officer, the Government amendment removes the Scottish Greens call that this Parliament declares a nature emergency. It prefers to use the word crisis and to blow its own trumpet at a time when 1 in 9 species in Scotland faces extinction. Every other party in this chamber accepts that we do indeed face a nature emergency. Thousands of our constituents support this call, as do nature conservation groups like the RSPB, Wildlife and Countryside Link, WWF and Open Seas. They recognise the severity of the situation and the need for action. The mountain hare, one of our most iconic native mammals, is regarded as near threatened on the first red list of UK mammals. Its population status is reported as unfavourable by the government's own nature agency. It's no surprise then that this Parliament's vote 5 months ago yesterday to make the mountain hare a protected species was warmly welcomed by the huge number of people who campaigned to that end and by the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland who support an end to the indiscriminate culling of mountain hare. But we're still waiting for the Scottish Government to commence that power to bring that protection into effect. Time and time again, the Scottish Government has the power to act, but it chooses not to. The ongoing persecution of birds of prey continues with impunity. And we're still waiting for the Scottish Government's response to Professor Werrity's review, the Government's can-kicking response to raptor persecution, which it announced in May 2017. This whole process has taken years. Beavers, which this Government pledged to protect, are being killed and even exported in huge numbers. Anything, frankly, to get rid of them. But much of the cruelty inflicted upon wildlife in Scotland is wholly legal. Snares, traps and stink pits abound. And Scotland's driven grouse moors drive much of this killing. They're burnt and managed to the point of monoculture in the midst of a nature and climate emergency. Our motion today, I have less than 1 minute, calls for an end to driven grouse shooting. This activity, enjoyed by the few, takes up an area half the size of Wales. It stifles nature, to put it mildly, and its contribution to Scotland's economy is truly minuscule. It's a relic of a bygone era, so let's consign it to the dustbin of history where it belongs. It's holding back alternative land uses, of which there are many and better: forestry, rewilding, repopulation, ecotourism, which already brings in 5 times as much to the Scottish economy. Thankfully, people are far more interested in shooting Scotland's animals on film than they are shooting them with guns. These alternatives would enable nature to thrive. It would provide many more well-paid jobs. Liz Smith will be aware that the average job in the grouse industry attracts a salary of some £11,000 below the minimum wage. In concluding, Presiding Officer, licensing this industry won't address the fact that this cruel activity is, quite frankly, a shocking waste of space, and one that, in the face of the mass extinction of species and the climate emergency, we should no longer tolerate. I support the Green Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And of course, our environment is a subject that's not just close to the hearts of people living in rural Scotland, but also, of course, is close to the hearts of people living in urban Scotland, including in many parts of my constituency of Cowdenbeath. And I'm proud of the SNP Scottish Government's determination to protect and to promote our environment, with, as we have heard, Scotland being the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency, and indeed in regard to our world-leading climate change targets, and in regard to the undertaking to proceed with a build-back post-COVID-19 green recovery. And, as we've heard from the Cabinet Secretary, a recognition of the key importance of biodiversity and the twin approach in terms of treating biodiversity loss right alongside the climate emergency. And on the important issue of biodiversity, I do welcome the Scottish Government's recently announced plans to commission a new Scottish Centre of Expertise in Biodiversity. This, in fact, forms part of a new draft strategy for the Environment, Natural Resources and Agricultural Research Programme, which is currently out for consultation. This is to close, I think, on the 14th of December, and I would encourage my constituents and others to have a look at this and to make their views known, and to indicate what they would like to see in terms of the priorities and delivery mechanisms in the 5 key areas of plant and animal health, sustainable food systems, human impacts and environment, natural resources and rural futures. This work builds indeed on the current research programme, which has seen some £48 million of funding from the Scottish Government, which supports some 1,500 jobs and has helped research institutes in Scotland leverage in some £28 million in additional funding. And this approach demonstrates that the Scottish Government wants Scotland to play a key role in developing environmental solutions based on the best possible scientific evidence. And we can see this determination as well in the very significant investment in peatland restoration, with 20 million allocated in this year's budget and a commitment to invest 250 million over the next 20 years. Again, we can see this in forestry, where we have seen Scotland delivering over 80% of all new tree planting across the UK, with 22 million trees planted over the last year or so. I would say in the area of sustainable fish farming that a lot of progress has in fact been made, in particular further to the Rural Economy Committee's comprehensive report published in November 2018 on the future of salmon farming in Scotland. And I note in this regard that the Scottish Government has established a 10-year farmed fish health framework, and that this involves a wide range of specific work streams underway. Further, the Salmon Interaction Working Group was also set up to look at the issue surrounding the interaction of farmed and wild salmon under the independent chair of John Goodland, and it recently reported, I believe in May of this year, with some 40 recommendations. And it would be interesting to hear from the Minister as to where matters stand in that regard, taking into account, of course, that this report was published during lockdown and we have seen, of course, the global pandemic play out since that time. Also referred to the SEPA detailed plan in terms of future regulation published in 2018. And of course, these are very important issues to my constituents, Presiding Officer, where we see Maui based in Rosyth with over 600 jobs at the site. So the call from the Green Party in their motion today for a moratorium on expansion will be likely a cause of considerable concern to all these 600 plus workers and their families in Rosyth, who will be obviously worried about the consequential impacts on their jobs and their livelihoods. And in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would just say that there are a range of initiatives across Scotland in many, many different sectors. 4 minutes is not nearly long enough to do them all justice. One final issue that has not been discussed is the impact of Brexit on our high environmental standards. And we still don't know, with I think some 43 days to go, what on earth the position is going to be. What an absolute shambles on the part of the UK government. They're all sitting there, the Tory MSPs, grinning away as if this is good news for our environment. This is very bad news for our environment, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call on Maurice Golden to be followed by Sarah Boyack. Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The danger facing Scotland's wildlife is summed up in arguably the most important line in today's motion. 1 in 9 species is threatened with extinction from Scotland. A statistic that should give us all reason to pause. The latest Scottish Biodiversity Strategy report shows the average abundance of some 352 terrestrial and freshwater species has plummeted, down 24% since 1994. Of particular concern, Scottish seabird breeding populations have dropped dramatically, down 32% between 1986 and 2017. In total, according to the State of Nature Report 2019, of those species showing either strong or moderate changes in numbers, 49% have decreased. There is clear need to act, as the First Minister seemed to agree last year, telling Scottish Environment Link that challenges facing biodiversity are as important as the challenge of climate change, and I want Scotland to be leading the way in our response. So do I. But she made that commitment knowing that her government was failing to live up to it. A 2017 Scottish Natural Heritage report found the SNP were failing to deliver 13 out of 20 Aichi targets on biodiversity, and 16 out of 30 of the SNP's own biodiversity indicators are worsening or stagnating. In fact, over the past 10 years, there has been no significant change in the rate of species decline. And now they have no plan. The biodiversity strategy is 7 years out of date, and the wildlife strategy was never published. The lack of direction comes at a worse time, when protecting our natural heritage gives us the best shot at building back better. This is because, as WWF point out, our natural heritage is worth up to £23 billion to the economy, not to mention the climate change benefits. Nowhere is that more evident than in rural communities, where farmers and rural businesses are already working hard to protect the countryside and create jobs. Working alongside them, we can help them go further. Happy to take it.
Gillian Martin.
Many of those farmers benefit from leader funding. Does he know what the UK government is going to replace leader funding with?
Maurice Gordon.
The UK government's been quite clear that they plan to ensure that the funding relating to Europe will continue, and in fact we can get more streamlined processes so more of that funding goes directly to the people that need it. And that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. But it's no surprise that the SNP can't think up one intervention on biodiversity, Presiding Officer, and rather they would prefer to talk about Brexit and other matters. But for me, natural heritage is very important, and it's very disappointing that the SNP and indeed the chair of the Clare Committee is unable to speak about biodiversity and natural heritage. That's why the Scottish Conservatives propose a package of financial and technical assistance to create up to 15,000 hectares of high-quality woodland each year, restore peatland and create new hiking and nature trails, saving habitats, creating carbon sinks and generating green jobs. A programme of school farms can bring knowledge of these efforts to the next generation in our cities, where children can learn about wildlife, environmental protection and food production. And it is in our cities that offer the greatest opportunity. Enhancing biodiversity here, as WWF point out, can boost health and well-being. New green spaces and networks would create corridors for wildlife, help reduce pollution and give residents better access to nature. It's unfortunate that the SNP are not delivering for Scotland's biodiversity and natural heritage, but I hope that these measures that I've mentioned can act as a starting point for consensus, and I hope we can see that consensus on action before more of our biodiversity disappears.
Thank you. And I call on Sarah Boyack, who joins us remotely, to be followed by Andy Whiteman. Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the chance to debate our nature emergency, but I have to say I am surprised and actually disappointed that the Scottish Government proposes to delete this term, nature emergency, from the motion. I think it's especially shocking, given that we need to ensure that we don't just protect our natural environment as we tackle the climate emergency, but we have a joined-up approach to creating green jobs and green infrastructure. These things have to go together. So for me, removing reference to emergency seems like the priorities being removed for ensuring investment in the environment on equal terms, so that we deliver now and beyond the pandemic to address the stark social inequalities that exist in Scotland and to deliver a green and just transition. This is absolutely not the time for more of the same economic arguments. Now, several colleagues have already mentioned peatlands, and I think it's absolutely vital for us because peatlands cover more than 20% of Scotland's land area, and they play a vital role in carbon storage, combating the effects of climate change, and in maintaining Scotland's water quality and rich biodiversity. They also reduce flood risk, support farming and crofting. And as Claudia Beamish said, it is vital that we see proper protection for our peatlands and investment in them. And as with national parks, that we see a joined-up approach to land use management that brings wider benefits as well. And that's why our amendment highlights that need for a joined-up approach and making sure that regional land use planning is at the centre of this. And that means that we have community land ownership, that people are involved in making sure that we deliver biodiversity, because as several members have said already, we are currently failing on biodiversity targets, and that isn't good enough. So we need to link biodiversity and tackling the nature emergency as part of the key policy framework in the upcoming National Planning Framework. It's vital that we just deliver this as a core policy, not as an add-on. And it's also important that we focus on improving our communities as well as we improve our biodiversity. And several colleagues have mentioned already this afternoon that in our urban areas, we need to recognise the importance of involving communities to integrate the biodiversity where they live through our parks and green spaces, through providing more allotments and community gardens. And our local authorities have a crucial role to play in this, because it's important that while we promote biodiversity, we're also promoting health and well-being and access to affordable healthy food and access to safe exercise. So all of these things are about bringing our communities together, but respecting and protecting biodiversity. And we need to make sure that the Scottish Government has a leadership role, but it works clearly in partnership with our local authorities and with communities to make sure that we are all involved in this process. Finally, I do want to thank constituents for their lobbying on the issue of grouse moors, biodiversity and animal welfare. That has to be part of our biodiversity challenge, and it has to be part of the nature emergency and tackling that. And I want to thank the League Against Cruel Sports for their briefing. We need action now. It's over a year since the Werrity report was published, and we simply do not have time for further delay. This is something where we need to be pushing together and getting action. Next year, COP meets in Glasgow, and we should be setting an example as a developed nation with fantastic landscapes, nature and resources. We need to protect them and enhance them as part of a strategy to retain and generate new employment, creating new jobs which respect nature, which give everyone the opportunity for access to jobs while meeting our low carbon ambitions. And across the globe, we can see the direct links between nature, biodiversity and climate change. Lives are being lost, economies destroyed by drought and forest fires, loss of habitats. Virus transmissions are now having an increasing impact on health across the globe. So we need leadership and action on our nature emergency now. Let's call it like it is. Let's get going. And I hope we support Claudia Beamish's amendment this afternoon. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call on Andy Whiteman to be followed by Gillian Martin.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. The decline of species, habitats and biodiversity in Scotland is due to a multitude of factors, of course, but human impacts through land use, pollution and habitat destruction have been key. And in Scotland, of course, we know that species have been driven to extinction through persecutions, habitats have been obliterated through overgrazing, native forests continue to degrade, propped up by public subsidies, and our marine ecosystem is being systematically destroyed. And as revealed earlier this month by Open Seas and the Ferret, a leaked government report concluded that marine habitats in 5 regions have shrunk between 2011 and 2019. It says, for example, the target of no loss has not been achieved in the Moray Firth, West Highlands, Outer Hebrides, Argyll and Clyde regions. Now, this includes a 10% loss on the Clyde's merle beds, 53% of Argyll's flame shells, 27% of the Outer Hebrides seagrass and more than 90% of the Highlands serpulid reefs. And this report blames the decline on dredging, trawling, anchoring, overfishing and engineering works, as well as climate change, ocean acidification and pollution from fish farms. And Presiding Officer, the dredging damage in Loch Carron in 2017 was a wake-up call, but ministers have been unwilling to limit this continued damage, even inside marine protected areas. And whilst the scientific evidence and advice is for action, government has apparently preferred to sidle up to the vested interests of this damaging industry instead. In the Small Isles Marine Protected Area, scallop dredging continues even today, 6 years after designation. What is the point of a protected area if it's going to be carved up to prop up environmentally damaging practices? And remember, this seabed is publicly owned. It belongs to all of us. And efforts to reverse these trends of decline have been compromised by the willingness of government ministers to cosy up to the industrial shooting, farming and fishing lobby, whose interests have been consistently privileged in policy development. And there exists, Presiding Officer, a structural blindness to the long-term elite capture of public policy. But sometimes the mask slips. In 2013, at the centenary dinner of the National Farmers Union of Scotland, the then Cabinet Secretary Richard Lochhead stated without a hint of embarrassment, "It's an honour to serve as your minister in the Scottish Government." He then went on to say he had the honour of being your representative in government. Presiding Officer, Mr Lochhead was not the Farmers Minister. He was not their representative. And this subtle but important distinction between agricultural policy delivered in the public interest and the vested interests of producer groups is now so well entrenched that nature's voice is almost never heard. And the trend is continued in his own incorrigible style by the current Cabinet Secretary Fergus Ewing, who stated publicly in 2018 that no industry was more precious to his way of thinking than the salmon farming industry, and that he would deal with the industry's detractors. Presiding Officer, a nature emergency has been in existence in Scotland's seas and land for decades. It's time to put nature, not vested interests, first.
And in the last of our opening contributions, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we've seen from the First Minister's declaration of a climate emergency, making a bold statement can galvanise policy and indicate commitment to the country. It sends a message of intent and it makes headlines. But as everyone here knows, it's action that matters. The creation of marine protected areas, peatland restoration programmes, woodland restoration programmes are only 3 significant actions in response to the climate emergency and the biodiversity loss that we recognise. The RSPB sent us a briefing that calls for a nature recovery plan that prioritises 5 areas that should form part of our green recovery, and I agree with them all on principle. They are expanding Scotland's native woodlands, restoring peatlands, tackling deer management, delivering a Scottish nature network, and nature and climate-friendly farming. A lot of that is in line with the Cabinet, from the environmental strategy the Cabinet Secretary outlined, and it also echoes recommendations from the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee and the work that's been doing in historical inquiries and scrutiny over this Parliament session. The Scottish Government's multi-annual commitment of £250 million to restore peatland is hugely significant in terms of tackling the aims of both the world-leading net zero ambitions and tackling the biodiversity crisis that the State of Nature report identified last year. The money invested here and in the Forestry Grant Scheme will not only go a long way to delivering on those aims, but it's also a creator of nature-based jobs in rural Scotland. But sadly, we are set to lose vital dedicated nature funding from the EU LIFE programme as the UK exits the EU. But also, as I mentioned in my intervention, losing LEADER funding, which so many community groups use to drive local programmes that enhance our natural environment and with it human well-being. EU LIFE funding was given to Auchnellan Farm, a demonstration farm outside Logie Coldstone in Mr Burnett's constituency of Aberdeenshire West, run by the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, designed to influence and inform farmers, land managers and government about sustainable game and wildlife conservation in the countryside. But the cumulative impact of the many LEADER-funded smaller programmes that have opportunities for individuals, businesses and communities that have supported rural development and environmental protection throughout Scotland cannot be overstated. In my constituency, recent LEADER funding has supported a huge tree planting operation on the floodplain at Uriside Park in Inverurie and funded 2 green space and biodiversity development officers for the local authority who create and maintain green spaces across the whole of Aberdeenshire to increase biodiversity and the types of recreation spaces available for residents. LEADER also funded support for farming businesses to diversify, building resilience and helping farmers and crofters to make their businesses more sustainable, like in the case of the eco-bothies at Newborough. And in other cases, LEADER has supported farmers as they convert areas of their land for activities that promote biodiversity and sequester carbon. Where is the shared prosperity fund that the UK government promised would replace this EU funding? We have heard nothing. I don't have time. I'm in my last minute. And with only 7 weeks to go to the end of transition, their silence is extremely worrying. A final word on just transition. Last Friday, I was on a panel representing Scotland on the Green Recovery, hosted by the Bildu Party of the Basque Country. My fellow panellists were from Ireland, Sweden, Finland and Denmark, all small EU member states. The other panellists made much mention of the EU Just Transition Fund, worth €100 billion, and the €1 trillion European Green Deal investment plan, more funds we do not have access to. Liam MacArthur may call it navel-gazing, but I call it our only way back into the EU, who takes green recovery seriously and has money to back it up. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Martin. We move now to closing speeches. Alec Rowley to be followed by Finlay Carson. Alec.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be closing for Labour in this important debate on the declaration of a nature emergency. Our amendment calls for an urgent and robust licensing scheme for driven grouse moor management, the phase-out of large-scale peat extraction and addressing damaging fishing practices in sensitive marine environments. I agree with Gillian Martin that actions speak louder than words, and that's why it's so baffling that the SNP can't bring themselves to actually support this approach. This is a sensible approach that I would have hoped could begin to build consensus for action. As the Coalition of Grouse Moor Reform have stated, promoting a wide-scale change from driven grouse moor management towards sustainable multiple use in a more wooded landscape would make a major contribution to addressing two of the most significant environmental issues of our time: the climate emergency and the catastrophic biodiversity loss. My colleague Claudia Beamish made the point that we must recognise the need for rapid change while also respecting the challenges faced by rural and coastal communities in the urgently needed just transition by bringing support for that change as it happens. I would have thought that the Green Party would also recognise this and would have been more willing to work with others so that we can make those required rapid changes. An all-or-nothing approach, as they are proposing, will end with nothing. But the Greens seem determined that that's how they want to proceed. The SNP government tell us today that they will respond to the Verity report anytime soon. But they have been telling us that for months. Why don't they just make a decision and bring forward a proposal for a robust licensing scheme? And why are the SNP not willing to recognise the need for a declaration of the nature emergency? Our proposals are a common sense approach that recognise the need for change and a willingness to do this in a manner that allows the transition to take effect with minimal disruption. Huge swathes of land in Scotland are managed for grouse, and if land use change is desired, then the arguments need to be put forward to ensure we bring people with us. Industry figures show that grouse shooting adds fewer than 3,000 jobs on average, with an average salary of £11,500 per year. The economic contribution, therefore, is relatively small in comparison to the value of forestry and tourism to our rural economy. As such, we can and we should be far more ambitious when it comes to tree planting. Woodlands can provide a range of environmental benefits, including reduced soil erosion and landscape, increased carbon storage, increased biodiversity, improvements in water quality and flow and resilience to climate change, pests and disease. And it has the knock-on effect of delivering skilled and well-paid jobs in forestry as well as tourism. This would see a natural transition from land managed for grouse to land being reforested for all the previously mentioned benefits. We have an abundance of land in Scotland that could be managed more effectively. Much of Scotland's land is in private hands and managed for private interests. But increasing community ownership, building on our plans for a greener economy and delivering much-needed jobs in rural communities should surely be our goal. So, Presiding Officer, I would appeal again to take the common sense approach to this and support the Labour amendment today.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. And I call on Finlay Carson, who joins us remotely. Mr Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Much of my contribution repeats and reinforces the contributions already made, but I make no apologies for that, given the importance of this topic. Scotland has long traded on its image as a country with a clean natural environment. However, it's green on the outside, but sadly it's not as healthy as it could be. Species are declining both on land and at sea. Habitats are fragmenting while soils degrade. The Scottish Wildlife Trust has already warned that nearly half of the country's species have declined and 1 in 9 are threatened with extinction. It is rightly called for the Scottish Parliament to declare an emergency. to reverse the continued deterioration of what is fundamentally our life support system. A move echoed also by the Scottish Environmental Link, who warned that nature is in crisis with dramatic declines in wildlife and habitats happening at unprecedented rates. As navel-gazing Gillian Martin mentioned, that last year the First Minister acknowledged, and I quote, "Challenges facing biodiversity are as important as the challenges of climate change, and I want Scotland to be leading the way in our response." However, what Gillian Martin failed to mention was that time and time again, just like during the 13 years in power, the SNP talk the talk, but have missed targets and failed to deliver. In 2017, the report by Scottish Natural Heritage found that the Scottish Government failed to meet 13 out of 20 international biodiversity targets. And under the SNP, 12 species of national conservation importance were also found to be at serious risk, including the Scottish wildcat, the ash tree, great yellow bumblebee, and the freshwater pearl mussel. It's also broken its promise to designate 4 new marine protected areas in 2020. So perhaps it's little wonder that the SNP haven't published a biodiversity strategy in 7 years, and the same goes for its commitment to publish a wildlife management strategy. We're still waiting for that. The Wildlife and Natural Environment Scotland Act 2011 made it imperative that all public bodies report on their biodiversity compliance, yet only 66 of Scotland's 139 public bodies responded and produced a report for the period 2015 to 2017. Other environmental shortcomings by the SNP include missing their own legal emission targets, ditching their flagship climate change commitment to ban biodegradable landfill waste in Scotland, and all that while our streets are failing to meet legal standards for clean air. Yet hundreds of thousands of jobs depend directly on the Scottish natural environment. Indeed, in this sector, it was estimated to be worth £17.1 billion a year to the Scottish economy in 2008. The Scottish Conservatives will submit amendments to strengthen the environmental protections in the Continuity Bill, because there are areas where it needs to be strengthened considerably in order to deliver the results that we want to achieve. One area of concern is the lack of data being collected in order that we can accurately see what targets are being met, how they're being achieved, and the actual results. I believe there needs to be a fit-for-purpose database for biodiversity and natural capital in Scotland. This is something shared by Professor Dieter Helm, the eminent British economist, who said that his data should be made available to everybody. He said he would regard that as an important public good that can be provided to everybody in society. The Scottish Government needs to spend considerably more than it's doing to make this happen and allow us to move forward positively, knowing our actions are helping species and habitats diversity. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many rural areas around Scotland have seen a sharp increase in visitor numbers, people escaping to towns and cities to discover our great outdoors, which is one of the reasons I think it's vital that funding is found to improve the network of countryside rangers who wouldn't only be there to protect and patrol rural areas, but at the same time help educate people and allow them to learn more about our wonderful biodiversity. There is unfortunately little time to highlight our precious marine wildlife, particularly given the decline in the number of seabed habitats in recent years. But I must comment on how disappointing it is, given the cooperation required to introduce trial satellite tracking and fishing vessels and the welcome cooperation of our fishermen, that a leaked document for the Scottish Government was used to attack the fishing industry and undermine the trust that is needed. We need all stakeholders, not just opinion holders, to come together to find the right solutions to protect these vital habitats and fishing grounds for the future. Presiding Officer, as with so many policies from this SNP government, their ability to grandstand and make ambitious, impressive announcements far outweighs their ability to deliver. But like our climate, when it comes to biodiversity and our natural environment, it's crucial that we act now to halt any further loss before it's too late, because when it's gone, it's gone.
Thank you very much, Mr Carson. And I call on the Minister, Marie Goujon. Minister, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I was going to start off by saying that I was actually grateful to the Greens for introducing this motion and to everybody for their really passionate contributions to this debate. But I think it was just a shame that the tone seemed to just completely alter with a lot of them. And that's where I think that, especially in relation to Andy Whiteman's comments, that I won't bother repeating, but which I absolutely refute. But I think that I think it shows a complete lack of understanding of actually, in some ways, how we have to work in government and how we work in a responsible way. Yes.
Golden.
I thank the Minister for the intervention. Just on the point that she mentioned, does she agree that the end to driven grouse moor management would lead to a decimation of the rural economy and in doing so actually threaten biodiversity?
Minister Marigujo.
I mean, I think the member may have referenced it in his contribution to the debate as well, but we published research just last week. And again, when it comes to grouse moors and our response to that, we will be issuing our response to the Werrity report in due course. But again, I mean, I would want to highlight, Alison Johnson talked about mountain hares there, and I think that's a case in point of what we're looking at. That was an amendment that was introduced to the Animals and Wildlife Bill at the 11th hour with no previous discussion. It had never been raised, or we hadn't had the chance to scrutinise it, let alone as a parliament. And that now means that a lot of the work we couldn't undertake, and we agreed with that as a government, and the Parliament agreed with that amendment, quite rightly. But a lot of the groundwork that we then weren't able to do, we then had to do after that amendment was passed and after the bill was passed. And that's what we're looking at now, is the chance to, we need to be able to undertake that work if we want a scheme that is going to work efficiently, work properly and work well. And I'm sorry I can't take the contribution, but there is so much to cover today, as you can see from the variety of different issues that were covered both in the motion and in all the contributions. Now, we do disagree with elements of the motion where it preempts decisions that we're yet to announce as a government, or where there are a number of pieces of work underway. I don't think anyone here is in any doubt about the crisis or the urgency with which that needs to be tackled. And I think that we're all absolutely united in that. As a government, we announced a climate emergency because we recognise, and have said many times previously, that our climate and biodiversity are intrinsically linked. You cannot consider one in absence of the other. Now, nature-based solutions such as woodland restoration and tree planting, peatland restoration and protection for salt marsh and seagrass beds will mitigate climate change, flooding and improve water quality and biodiversity. And we are already taking bold action to deliver this. Biodiversity is a priority for this government in its own right, not just because of the links to climate change. Biological diversity underpins the functioning of the ecosystems which provide the benefits to people that we rely on from nature. These benefits from creating and sustaining the soil in which we grow our food and the insects that we rely on to pollinate our crops, to water purification and carbon sequestration, all are fundamental to our survival. Our existing strategy delivers many projects which contribute to the restoration of biodiversity and, importantly, to ecological connectivity. And many of these are undertaken in partnership with our nature conservation organisations. And I'm keen to highlight one of those projects today, which is Nature Scott's new Species on the Edge project. That's been co-produced in partnership with 7 of Scotland's nature conservation organisations. And that project will address the need to focus the right action in the right places and will provide £6.2 million over the next 5 years to protect around 40 of our nationally and internationally vulnerable species. We continue to deliver our biodiversity strategy and to develop many new measures to address the loss of biodiversity in Scotland. Our 2018 programme for government, committed to a Biodiversity Challenge Fund, was awarded £1.8 million since 2019. A further £2 million was committed in the 2019 programme for government, and a further £3 million for biodiversity has been committed for 2021-2022. And that helps enable targeted action for priority habitats and species to accelerate our efforts to meet international biodiversity commitments. Now, I also want to cover the Werrity report and to acknowledge the work of Professor Werrity and the Grousemere Management Review Group. And I know that that's been raised and mentioned by Alex Rowley, as well as many others in their contributions today. I know there is a frustration at the fact that we're still to issue our response, but I would just say, in response to those criticisms and complaints, there wasn't just one recommendation within that report. There were many recommendations, all with far-reaching implications that we want to consider fully. And that's all in the context of a pandemic, the fact that we'd had various pieces of legislation to take through Parliament, as well as dealing with Brexit at the same time. So the response, we said, will be due later in the autumn, and that is, we will deliver that then. And that is why I can't support the Green motion as it's drafted. We commissioned this work, and it's important that we're allowed to announce our response and conclusions to that work. In relation to the motion's reference to salmon farming, there's a great amount of work going on in that regard, and Annabel Ewing talked a lot about that in her contribution and outlined the importance of the sector to various communities across Scotland. We're improving the regulatory processes based on the application of available evidence and continued enhancements in the scientific base to provide more benefit to the communities where aquaculture is based. We carefully considered the recommendations from the parliamentary inquiry and a range of actions are underway, including the Salmon Interactions Working Group and through the Farmed Fish Health Framework. SEPA has now launched its new regulatory framework and sector plan for finfish aquaculture, including measures to improve environmental compliance to ensure the size of fish farms is better matched to environmental capacity. Now, I would say that we want to lead globally on all of these issues. And we've been clear that in line with most other countries around the world, there is more to be done to improve the condition of biodiversity in Scotland. We are rising to that challenge. We're contributing to the international considerations on how best to proceed, and we will respond rapidly when the outcome of those negotiations is clear. And that's why it's frustrating to see the motion from the Greens today. And just like some of the other motions and amendments, there's a lot in there that we can all support. But I think by them throwing the kitchen sink at it, knowing that a lot of this work is underway, knowing the sheer impossibility right now of, for example, where they've talked about the demand for urgent legislation, I don't think they've sought or expected parliamentary support for their motion, and that's what's disappointing about it. We'll work with anyone across the chamber who wants to seriously work with us to tackle our climate and biodiversity crisis, but I would have to ask if the Greens can seriously say the same.
Thank you very much. And I call on Mark Ruskell to bring our debate to conclusion till just after 5:10.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Can I thank members for their engagement in this debate here this afternoon? They're rapid and emotional, contributions, strongly emotional contributions as well, supporting our environment and wanting to declare a nature emergency. I am disappointed, though. I am very disappointed that the Scottish Government has attempted to delete the declaration of a nature emergency from this amendment, from this motion, despite the fact that this motion was shared with the government in advance, as indeed it was shared with all of the other parties as well. And really, for the Cabinet Secretary to say in her opening speech that this was designed to fail, well, we reached out to government, as we often do with legislation, with debates in this chamber, and we asked the government to engage with us. And when they don't, obviously, it's very disappointing. And I think that disappointment is shared across opposition parties in this chamber. I think Sarah Boyack spoke very well of the urgency of the nature emergency and how we need to also, not just agree the emergency, declare it, but also to agree the basic actions that we need to take to tackle this. Now, the Cabinet Secretary talked about the government's twin crisis basis. They're going to deal with climate change and the nature emergency at the same time. But the reality is that with climate change, we have a climate law in place. We have a legislative underpinning to our action on climate change. We have scrutiny of government. We have targets. We have a UK Climate Change Committee. We don't have any sort of commitment to that legislative approach when it comes to the nature emergency. We don't have any legislative approach to the setting of targets and the action that is needed. And I think Finlay Carson highlighted this when he reeled off the strategies that we've had over the years on biodiversity from successive Scottish governments, but they haven't been underpinned by legislation and they've been largely ineffective. And I think that's why every opposition party in this chamber recognises the importance of not just declaring emergency, but also pinning down the importance of putting targets and underpinning environment strategies into legislation. That's why they've sought not to delete that first half of the motion. It's disappointing that the SNP have decided to delete that in their amendment. Now, we need the legislation because we need the planning, we need the funding to deliver action on these targets. And I think a point that was made by Gillian Martin, particularly in the situation we are now post-Brexit, where there's funding uncertainty, we need to see nature prioritised. And of course, there are jobs that we can create. A Green New Deal. I applaud the work that the government has done and the commitment that they've made to restoring peatlands and the benefits that can come from that. But I would say to Liz Smith that burning peatlands is not the best way to create a carbon sink. If we're going to restore peatlands and restore biodiversity, we actually need to make them wet, so that they don't burn and they're still alive and they're actually doing what they're doing, restoring nature and also acting as an important carbon sink. And as for the future of the driven grouse industry, well, Alison Johnson put it well. There's far more people who are interested in shooting wildlife on film than shooting guns at the moment. Ecotourism industry 5 times bigger than the driven grouse sector. And if I thought for 1 minute that this sector actually wanted to reform, that it actually wanted to adopt a licensing regime, that would be a very different conversation. But the fact is that it's had years to reform itself, and it has done nothing. So, you know, I'm fed up, and I think the Greens are fed up with a waiting game here. We've waited for MPAs to be designated. We've waited for action on hair protection. We've waited for additional powers for the SPCA. We're still waiting. The whole Parliament's still waiting for a response from the government on the Werrity review. We're still waiting for the government to act fully on the recommendations of this Parliament's inquiry into salmon farming. And I would say to Annabel Ewing, if she really cares about jobs in Fife, in salmon processing, then she should ensure that industry has a sustainable future, that it is able to continue in the future. Because at the moment, that industry, no, I don't have time, at the moment, that industry is threatened with an export market ban to the US. That should be something that concerns her as much as it concerns me. And this is the danger that Andy Whiteman talked about. The more that government papers over the consensus, the more that it's captured by these corporate sectors and doesn't balance that with science and doesn't balance that with the interest of conservation and other stakeholders, the more it stifles progress and it stifles change and it stifles our ability to tackle this and act on this climate emergency. This Parliament will have another opportunity next week with a continuity bill to lay out its strong objectives for protecting the environment, for the environmental principles, for a strong watchdog in Scotland, Environmental Standards Scotland, that can hold governments to account. And I think, and I hope that, although we've been unable perhaps to find consensus here today, that when that bill comes to the committee next week, that certainly amongst the opposition parties and maybe even with government, we can find a consensus to make that bill stronger, to protect the environment and to ensure that we're acting on this nature emergency. That's the second opportunity, Presiding Officer. We might have failed today, but we'll be coming back next week.
Thank you very much, Mr Erskine, and that concludes our debate on the declaration of a nature emergency. Our next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 23403 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out our business programme. Could I call on Mr Day to move the motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No member has asked to speak on the motion. The question therefore is that motion 23403 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, thank you. The next item is consideration of Business Motion 23404 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau on the Stage 2 timetable for a bill. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Again, no member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. The question is that motion 23404 be agreed. Are we agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And the next item is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 23405 on the Office of the Clerk. Could I ask Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And this decision will be taken at decision time. To which we now turn. The first question this evening is that Amendment 23385.3 in the name of John Swinney, which seeks to amend motion 23385 in the name of Ross Greer on safe schools be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We're going to move to a division and we're just going to suspend business shortly for a short break to allow members to access the voting app. A short suspension. Thank you, colleagues. We are now back in session. And so we're going to move to the vote. The question is that Amendment 23385.3 in the name of John Swinney, which seeks to amend motion 23385 in the name of Ross Greer on safe schools, be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. This will be a 1-minute division. That vote is now closed. I would encourage all members who weren't able to register the vote to let me know by using a point of order, either in person here in the chamber or online. Could I call Maureen Watt? Maureen, if you just wait a second, Maureen, what the microphone? There we are.
I wasn't allowed to vote and it would have been a yes.
Thank you very much. That vote will be added to the voting roll. Thank you very much, Ms Watt. And I can note that to Aileen Campbell, who wishes to make a point of order, Ms Campbell, your vote was registered, so you did vote. The result of the vote on amendment number 23385.3 in the name of John Swinney is yes 58, no 64. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 23385.2 in the name of Jamie Green, which seeks to amend the motion in the name of Ross Greer, be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote and members may cast their votes now. Again, a 1-minute division on Jamie Green's amendment. Thank you very much. That vote is closed. I would ask all members who need to make a point of order, who didn't think they voted, to let me know. And I call Gil Patterson to make a point of order. Gil Patterson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app froze. It just says there is no vote currently open, and I would have voted no if given the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr Patterson. Your vote no will be added to the voting roll. Thank you. Point of order, Mike Russell. Can you wait till your light illuminates, Mr Russell?
Presiding Officer, my app also froze, so I would have voted no.
I can assure you, Mr Russell, your vote was recorded in that case. And I can see Sarah Boyack is calling for a point of order. I can just say to Ms Boyack that your vote was recorded. Your vote was recorded. Thank you very much. The result of the vote on amendment number 23385.2 in the name of Jamie Green is yes 64, no 58. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that amendment 23385.1 in the name of Ian Gray, which seeks to amend the motion in the name of Ross Greer, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next question is that motion 23385 in the name of Ross Greer as amended be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote and members may cast their votes now. This will be a 1-minute division on the amended motion in the name of Ross Greer. That vote is now closed. I would ask members who don't believe they have voted to let me know and make a point of order either in person or through the voting app. And I call Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have abstained in that vote, but my system has frozen.
Thank you very much, Ms Adamson. Your vote will be recorded as an abstention in the voting roll. Thank you. I can confirm, Elaine Smith is calling for a point of order. I can confirm to Ms Smith that you have voted. Your vote was registered. I call Rachel Hamilton to make a point of order. Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can you hear me? Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes. My screen didn't connect at all. I wasn't able to vote.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. Your vote as a yes will be recorded and added to the voting roll. Thank you. And Aileen Campbell is calling for a point of order, but Ms Campbell, I can assure you, you did vote. Your vote was registered. Thank you, colleagues. The result of the vote on motion 23385 in the name of Ross Greer as amended is yes 64. There was 1 vote against. There were 56 abstentions and the motion as amended is therefore agreed. Now the next question is that motion 23385 in the name of Ross... Oh, sorry, pardon. So we move to the next question. I would remind members that if the amendment in the name of Rosanna Cunningham is accepted, then the amendments in the name of Liz Smith and Claudia Beamish will fall, will be preempted. So the question is that Amendment 23383.4 in the name of Rosanna Cunningham, which seeks to amend motion 23383 in the name of Mark Ruskell on declaration of a nature emergency be agreed. Are we agreed?
Yes.
Are we agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote and members may cast their votes now. Again, a 1-minute division. That vote is now closed. I would encourage all members who believe they were not able to vote to let me know, either through a point of order in the chamber or online. Point of order, Alistair Allen.
I got the message, connection is lost, so I voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Allen. I can assure you your vote was recorded. Thank you very much, colleagues. The result of the vote on amendment number 23383.4 in the name of Rosanna Cunningham is yes 85, no 35. There was 1 abstention. The amendment is therefore agreed. Because it is agreed, the amendments in the name of Liz Smith and Claudia Beamish fall. So the next question is that motion 23383 in the name of Mark Ruskell as amended on declaration of a nature emergency be agreed. Are we agreed?
Yes.
We're not agreed. We'll move to a vote. Members may cast their votes now. That vote is closed. Any member who was not able to vote, please let me know through a point of order. Alien's checking again, yeah. Thank you, colleagues. The result of the vote on motion 23383 in the name of Mark Ruskell as amended is yes 87, no 33. There were 2 abstentions. The motion as amended is therefore agreed. Now, our final question is that motion 23405 in the name of Graham Day on the office of the clerk be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes decision time. We'll move on shortly to a members' debate in the name of Claire Adamson on Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month 2020, but we'll just have a short pause while members and ministers change seats. And I would just encourage all members to be careful to observe social distancing rules, to wear masks when leaving the chamber and to follow the one-way systems. Thank you.